Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. TED Talks released a Yuval Noah Harari presentation on June 17, 2022, wherein the well-known historian and philosopher tries to tell policymakers in the world what it would cost to prevent catastrophic climate change. Where I live, in Calgary, we used to be under 2 miles of glacial ice. No one could have stopped it forming, and no one made it melt away. The symbol of that power is this 16,500 ton or 18,200 ton boulder, a glacial erratic, south of Calgary called Okotoks by the Blackfoot people. It was pushed here all the way from Jasper, 400 kilometers to the north by glacial activity. That's the power of nature. That is climate change, the immutable power of natural forces on Earth, like oceans and clouds interacting chaotically with the gravitational and energetic waves of forces of the sun, lunar and planetary orbits, and galactic influences like cosmic rays. But what if we assume Harari's anthropogenic climate theory is correct instead? What about his numbers? If we wanted to switch to a low-carbon world, is that possible? How long would it take, and at what cost? Harari claims that he and his team at Sapienship have pored over the numbers and come to the conclusion, like many economists they refer to, that it would only cost 2% of the global GDP to stop climate change. The trick is they used models, computer simulations to arrive at these conclusions. More on this later. If global GDP is about $84 trillion US, that means that Harari and his team claim it would only cost $1.68 trillion. This is laughable. The world has already spent trillions on investing in wind and solar. Emissions have risen dramatically ever since the Rio conference in 1992, and climate change continues to change, as it has done for the past 4.5 billion years. Harari says we're not talking about burning piles of banknotes in some huge sacrifice to the spirits of the earth. We're talking about making investments in new technologies and infrastructure, such as advanced batteries or other technologies to store solar energy and updated power grids to distribute it. That's what he says. Well, according to the climate gurus at McKinsey, we are talking about burning piles and piles of banknotes. They say the transformation of the global economy needed to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 would be universal and significant, requiring $9.2 trillion in annual average spending on physical assets, $3.5 trillion more than today. And that's looking at $275 trillion. That's a lot of burning, but it's still not accurate. Like I said, we've already burned piles of banknotes of your tax dollars, and it was a huge sacrifice to Gaia and a big windfall for green crony capitalists. Harari's naive statement shows the folly of having historians and economists trying to address complex issues like electrical generation and power grid operations. It's almost as bad as bankers trying to do climate risk assessments, or like the Royal Bank of Canada. They also came up with a $2 trillion figure for net zero, but that's just for Canada alone, far too underestimated. Friends of Science Society has a team of professional engineers who regularly do analyses of renewable energy plants. In Alberta alone, my province, a province of 4 million people, as shown in our report, The True Cost of Wind and Solar for Alberta, well, at today's prices, the batteries needed to ensure a reliable supply of electricity from wind and solar generators in Alberta would cost almost $2 trillion. That's more than 2% of the global GDP, and that's just for the province of Alberta alone. And what of a larger place like the USA? A detailed analysis by Ken Gregory, professional engineer, shows the total capital cost of electrification using 2020 data is estimated at $290 trillion US, or 13.5 times the US 2019 gross domestic product. That's based on wind, solar, and batteries. In 2021, the global GDP was 96.5 trillion. So Harari goes on to claim that investments in wind and solar and battery storage are likely to be profitable, ignoring the fact that these industries rely almost entirely on government subsidies to survive, and they cause the costs of power to rise astronomically as renewables are parasites on the power grid. Likewise, for every megawatt of renewable power added, you need to add equivalent megawatts of conventional dispatchable power, meaning coal-fired power plants, natural gas, nuclear, or hydro. Renewables only work when there's wind or sun. A modern power grid requires consistent flow of power to exactly match the demand, or the system will shut down. Billions for blackouts. Doesn't sound like a good investment to me. Harari also claims these investments will create lots of new jobs and economic opportunities and are likely to be economically profitable in the long run, in part by reducing health care expenditures and saving millions of people from sickness caused by air pollution. In fact, modern healthcare requires reliable, affordable electricity as its number one essential element. Medical electrical power must be high quality, meaning no dips or surges. Surges are typical of wind and solar, and that knocks the precision calibration of medical instruments off kilter. Studies across the world show that green jobs mean a loss of at least 2 other jobs, often because the industry simply moves on to countries with cheaper power and fewer stupid Green New Deal regulations. And as for air pollution, the people who are dying from air pollution are those in developing nations who are forced to cook and heat their homes over open flames, burning wood, dung, and other biomass. Their lives would be saved with proper grid-scale electricity for cooking, heating, and light. But going back to climate change, Harari says we have learned in recent years to define our goal in terms of one number, 1.5 degrees Celsius, invoking his 2% of global GDP as another number for the means to control climate. And he says it tells us that preventing catastrophic climate change is a totally feasible project. No, it's not feasible or affordable. In the first place, if you plan to dot the planet with wind and solar and transmission lines, you'll be using much more oil, natural gas, and coal because these devices consume vast quantities of fossil fuels in the making. And secondly, various independent studies have shown there's not enough raw materials in the world to power the world on renewables. Money can't change that reality. And neither can money prevent catastrophic climate change. That's just nonsense. The only reason people think there's an impending catastrophe is because green billionaires proliferated an entirely implausible scenario known as RCP 8.5 to further their vested interests in renewables. Harari says we will also need to change some of our behaviors and ways of thinking, from what we eat to how we travel. Is he an advocate of the Bill McKibben school of thought on this? Because we never elected either of them, and since there's no climate catastrophe, there's no need to change anything about how you live and eat, unless you want to. Like many in the climate cult, Harari invokes the notion of a World War II-style response to fighting climate change, noting that, for example, in 1945, the U.S. spent about 36% of its GDP on winning the Second World War. Well, most people don't realize, or they've forgotten, that the U.S. had actually been invaded by Japan during World War II. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and was sending incendiary balloons to light fires on the West Coast. Japan had encroached on the Aleutian Islands, and of course, most of Europe was under attack by Nazi Germany, which was close to developing a nuclear bomb. Wartime economies are command economies, an idea favored by former Greenpeace activist Ezra Silk and the Climate Emergency Mobilization Project of clinical psychologist Margaret Klein Salomon. She's keen to use the psychological tactics to scare you into compliance, like our house is on fire. Yep, that's hers. Then Harari thinks it would be a great idea to just invade Brazil's sovereignty by buying up the Amazon rainforest. I'm sure many people have similar ideas of what to do about the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. What country would welcome such interference by climate cultists? Who does he think he is? Ma yesh lo. Harari then goes on to claim that since governments spend huge sums of money on COVID, they should do the same for climate, as if we have any money left. He claims that pension funds should kick in money too, because he says they have 56 trillion US dollars. Well, unfortunately, pension funds also have huge unfunded liabilities. In 2016, Citibank reported that OECD countries have 78 trillion in unfunded liabilities. So there goes the climate investment cash, folks. Yuval Noah Harari falls for ENGO propaganda on fossil fuel subsidies as well. There are countries that subsidize oil. These are the countries with nationalized oil industries. But in the West, in countries like Canada and the US, it is the taxes and revenues from big oil that subsidize those governments and provide strong economies, thousands of jobs, and energy security. That's something that green Germany and Europe are literally begging for today. You don't believe me? Well, just look at Europe slowly collapsing on its knees, having to buy fossil fuels at high market prices now. Gradually, the great German industrialized nation is crumbling. No fossil fuels with reliable supply and reasonable price? No industry. No industry, no jobs. No jobs, no future, and certainly no money for climate change. Yuval Noah Harari then suggests we just collect the money for climate change from all the tax evasion money that's offshore. In fact, many of the green bonds are what they call ring-fenced, meaning that they are parked offshore. So get this, that means the taxpayer is subsidizing green energy projects that are financed by tax-sheltered green bonds offshore, and the taxpayer gets to pay triple or more of the price for power that's less reliable. See how it works? In a final twist of climate fate, this example of crazy climate economics just popped up. The Canada Pension Plan has invested about $500 million in a money-losing energy company in the UK called Octopus Energy Group, which is now paying their customers to sit in the dark to save energy. Of course, we can be proud that our pension fund shares investments in this group with Al Gore's Generation Investment Management. See, we're saving the planet. Too bad it's with hard-earned pensioners' funds. Can we be proud that this company is making sure it's Earth Hour every day and sometimes all day for people in the UK? As a historian, Yuval Noah Harari should recognize the climate-addled Great Reset for the neo-feudalism that it is, turning us all into medieval serfs. This time, the peasants will be beholden to carbon kings who have trillions of dollars invested in the lack of delivery of an invisible substance to no one. So the next time someone says, "It's too late, the climate apocalypse is here," just tell them, the climate emergency is over. We do have time. Matzav hachirum histayem. Yesh lanu zman nikuda. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.